That morning, the cafe off 3rd was running on 2 bright lights and an espresso machine that sounded like a bus leaving the station. I was in line rehearsing the day, email Ethan, check the plumber quote, pick up dog food. Ethan was in Dallas or Houston, I forget. The difference blurred once hotel carpets became our 3rd roommate. I kept thinking about whether a cappuccino could nudge a mood in the right direction. Then the barista called, next, and I reached for my wallet. Put hers with mine, a voice said behind me. I turned. He was a step closer than strangers usually stand, brown jacket, clean sneakers, the look of someone new to the building's still memorizing doors. You look like a person deciding fate with foam, he said, smiling like the line was ours alone. I'm deciding survival, I said. Fate would need a muffin. Dangerous add-on, he said. I'm Ryan. Just moved into 5B. Claire, I said, and slid my card back into the pocket, half grateful, half off balance. He waved off my thank you like it was nothing. We waited, side by side. Small talk found its track. The broken elevator last week, the garbage schedule, the fact that Seattle Rain had opinions about everyone's plans. When my cup hit the counter, he held it out to me. May your day be decided, he said. Preferably not by caffeine, I said, and left with the heat of the lid against my palm and the weird lightness that follows an easy laugh from a stranger. Later that afternoon, I took the trash down because the dog food actually did get picked up, and the bag was starting to smell like a science project. Out by the cans, a sedan idled crooked in the alley. Ryan stood with the trunk open, wrestling a charging cable that looked like a stubborn garden hose. Hey neighbor, he said, my car and I are having a communication breakdown. Electric? I asked. Allegedly, he said. It usually sips power like a saint. Today it's acting like it never met an outlet. I set the trash down and crouched to help, untwisting the cable. These connectors get dusty, I said. Wipe it. I handed him a shop towel someone had left near the cans. He bent to reach the port near the bumper. When he leaned in, he moved close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath on the side of my neck. Not dramatic, not a movie, just the kind of closeness that happens when 2 people reach for the same thing. The air tightened around the moment anyway. Sorry, he said, a quick smile, no apology in his posture, just awareness. It's fine. I kept my hands busy with the cable. We clicked it in together, his fingers brushing mine by accident, and the car's dash woke up with a soft chime. A green icon blinked alive. There, I said. Connected. He looked at the light, then at me, like the word had landed with more weight than it should. Appreciate the rescue. You paid for my coffee, I said. We're even. A gull screamed somewhere out by the water. A bus exhaled on the street. Nothing important happened. We stood there a beat longer than necessary, verifying that green meant green, and not some trick. I picked up my trash bag again. Welcome to the building, I said. Thanks for the neighborhood orientation, he said. If I vanish, it's because the charger ate me. Bring a muffin to negotiate, I said, and started toward the stairs. Back upstairs, the dog thumped her tail against the floor, asking about dinner as if I had forgotten the clock. I fed her and opened my laptop to a calendar dotted with Ethan's flights, like pushpins across a map. The day rolled forward. Emails, a quick load of laundry, the plumber confirming a time window no one could live with. I kept working, but the picture of that green icon held steady in my head. The sound of the car waking up, that easy private confirmation that something had taken. Near dusk, I carried a bag of recycling down just to clear the hallway. The alley was empty. The sedan was lined up straight now, charging in a clean hum. A tiny status light pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. I told myself it was nothing, useful, ordinary, a neighborly assist. But when I closed my door for the night, I could still feel the ghost of the cable in my hands. The way it clicked, the way the world said yes in a small, exact way. By the time I set my alarm, I knew I would remember that moment with ridiculous clarity. The connector, the green light, the polite space that briefly wasn't. I slept fine, or close enough, but morning would bring the thought back like a reminder banner. Connected. I didn't plan to make anything of it. I just knew I wouldn't forget. 2 nights later, Ethan called from another hotel lobby. Background noise, the echo of departure boards. He said he'd be home by Sunday, then corrected himself, Monday. I said okay before he finished the sentence. After the call, the apartment felt like an empty inbox. The dog had fallen asleep by the couch, and I was scrolling through movies I didn't want to watch when the knock came. Ryan stood there with a bottle of red wine and that almost apologetic smile people use when they're not sure if something's appropriate. I was about to start Casablanca, he said, and realized drinking alone makes me look like a cliché. Want to balance the optics? I hesitated for a second too long, then nodded. Only if you promise not to quote it. No promises, he said. His apartment was a mirror of mine, same floor plan, just less furniture. He'd stacked a few moving boxes near the wall, a sign of someone who hadn't decided how long they'd stay. The smell of old paper and cork filled the air as he opened the bottle. He poured 2 glasses, then turned on the movie. We talked through the opening credits, about parking tickets, about his job in design, about how he didn't know anyone in the city yet. Somewhere between the first glass and the second, the film became background noise. He was easy to talk to, like conversation didn't require effort, just presence. You don't talk about your husband much, he said quietly, not like a challenge, just an observation. There's not much to tell, I said. He travels. A lot. I must get lonely. I shrugged. I've had practice. He looked down at his glass. I moved here to start over. Thought being alone would make it easier to figure out what I wanted, did it? He smiled, a little tired. Ask me after the credits. We kept watching, and the space between us on the couch narrowed. Not deliberately, just gradually, the way a conversation drifts closer when you're both leaning in to hear. When he passed me the next glass, our fingers touched. It wasn't dramatic, just skin meeting skin, but something shifted, the kind of pause that lives longer than it should. For a second, I forgot to breathe. Then I laughed lightly, a defense mechanism I'd mastered years ago. We're going to spill it, I said. He didn't move his hand right away. Probably. The scene on the screen blurred in my peripheral vision. I set the glass down. I should go. He didn't argue, just stood and followed me to the door. When I reached for the handle, his hand brushed my elbow. It wasn't a grab, just contact. Accidental, maybe, but neither of us stepped back. Thanks for the movie, I said. Anytime, he said. His tone was steady, but his eyes weren't. The hallway felt colder than usual. I could still taste the wine, sharp and sweet. Inside my apartment, the lights looked too bright. I washed my glass as if that could reset the evening. It hadn't been anything, just 2 neighbors sharing a movie, a bottle, and a silence that grew legs. But when I turned off the lamp and saw my reflection in the dark window, I couldn't lie to myself about what had changed. We hadn't done anything wrong, not yet. But pretending that nothing happened already felt like its own kind of betrayal. The next afternoon, a knock pulled me away from the sink. Ryan stood outside, holding a folder and wearing that kind of half-smile people use when they're not sure if they're crossing a line. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I had a small accident this morning, just a fender scrape. Insurance wants a witness statement, and since you saw me last night, I thought, maybe you could confirm I wasn't out driving." He didn't look proud, asking. I hesitated, towel still in my hand. "You want me to lie?" "Not really lie," he said. "Just confirm I wasn't drunk or reckless or whatever. They're trying to blame me for something that wasn't my fault." I should have said no. Ethan would have said no immediately. Clean, practical, by the book. But Ryan's expression wasn't manipulative. It was uncertain, like he hated even asking. "Okay," I said finally, "if it's just about timing." He exhaled like someone had released a string around his chest. "Thanks, I owe you." The officer came half an hour later, clipboard in hand. I said I'd watched a movie with Ryan, that he'd been home all night. The words came out smoother than I expected. The officer nodded, wrote it down, thanked us, and left without suspicion. When the door closed, the hallway felt different, quieter but heavier. "Well," Ryan said, forcing a laugh, "guess that makes us official partners in crime." I smiled weakly. "Let's not make it a habit." He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes soft. "You're better at lying than I thought." "I'm not," I said. "I just didn't want to make things harder." "Still," he said. "Thank you." We stepped outside onto the small shared porch. The rain had stopped, but everything smelled like wet pavement and pine needles. The kind of air that felt too clean for what we'd just done. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," he said. "You just seemed like the kind of person who'd understand." "I'm not sure what that means." "It means," he said, meeting my eyes, "you look like someone who knows what it's like to feel cornered." He was close enough that the damp in his jacket mixed with the scent of coffee and laundry detergent. My pulse kicked faster. I looked away before it became something more. "You should probably finish your report," I said. "Right." He didn't move. "You ever think about how some people meet in ways that shouldn't matter but do?" I didn't answer. He stepped a little closer, just enough for me to notice. "Claire," he said quietly, "you smell like rain after a long week." The line was unexpected, not rehearsed, not flirtatious, just simple and too honest. I didn't know what to do with it. He smiled like he regretted saying it, nodded once, and walked down the steps. The gate clicked behind him. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the steam rise from the wet railing. That night, when Ethan called from the airport, I told him about the dog's vet appointment, about the mail, about everything except Ryan, about how lying once had been easier than expected. Before I went to bed, I checked the porch light. It was still on, the same dull glow that made the steps visible if anyone decided to come back. I told myself it didn't mean anything, just a favor for a neighbor, just a story I'd never have to repeat. But the next morning, when I caught my reflection brushing my hair, I knew I'd crossed into something that didn't have a clean way out. By the next week, seeing Ryan had become part of my routine. Not planned, just inevitable. He'd show up outside the building when I walked the dog, Or I'd find him at the coffee shop where it all started, reading on his phone, pretending not to wait for company. It was easy to act casual, too easy. One Friday evening, he called through the open window of my kitchen. "Come outside a second," he said. "You have to see this." In the backyard, the jasmine he'd planted along the fence had burst into bloom. The smell carried even before I reached him, sweet, clean, almost dizzying. He stood beside a small fire pit, a jacket over his arm. "Smells like a reward for surviving the week," I said. He handed me the jacket. "You're shivering." "I'm fine." "Humor me," he said, placing it over my shoulders himself. The fabric was warm from his hands. For a second, neither of us spoke. The streetlight from the alley drew thin gold lines across the garden. I looked up and realized how close he was. Close enough to see the small scar on his chin. Close enough that his breath came out visible in the cool air. "You shouldn't keep doing this," I said quietly. "Doing what?" "Making it feel easy." He looked at me, really looked, the way someone studies a language they've almost learned. "It doesn't feel easy to me." I should have stepped back. Instead, I stayed where I was. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't even a decision. It just happened, soft and steady, like gravity had made its choice before we did. There was no hunger in it, no rush, just the unmistakable certainty that we'd both crossed a line we couldn't uncross. When I finally moved away, the world seemed to catch its breath with me. "That didn't happen," I said, trying for steady but failing. "Okay," he said, voice low, unreadable. We stood there, facing each other, pretending to agree. I pulled off the jacket and gave it back. "It's late," he nodded. "I'll lock up the gate." Walking back to my apartment, I tried to focus on ordinary details. The sound of the dog's tags jingling, the porch light flickering. But everything felt off by an inch, like reality had shifted without warning. Inside, I went straight to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists. Ethan's toothbrush was still by the mirror, his jacket still on the hook. The symbols of our life hadn't changed, but something inside me had. When I crawled into bed, the sheets were cold. I stared at the ceiling and tried to replay. The kiss like a scene to be deleted, but my mind kept replaying the moment before it. The breath, the closeness, the quiet agreement neither of us spoke. By morning, I told myself I'd move on, that it had been a mistake suspended in air. But when I opened the window, the scent of jasmine drifted in again, faint, persistent, impossible to ignore. And I knew then, pretending it hadn't happened would only make it echo louder. Ethan came home a day early. I found out when his suitcase thudded against the hallway floor while I was still in the kitchen reheating pasta. He said the meetings wrapped up sooner than expected, like it was supposed to sound good news. But the air was already heavy, unfamiliar, like two people returning to a language they'd forgotten how to speak. He asked why the recycling hadn't gone out, why the dog's bowl was empty, why I'd left a half-finished glass of wine on the counter. None of it mattered, but somehow everything turned into something sharp. "You're somewhere else lately," he said. "I'm just tired," I answered. "Of what?" He didn't raise his voice, and that was worse. It meant he cared enough to notice, but not enough to push. I wanted to say something real, that I'd started counting his absences in time zones, not days, but I didn't. I said nothing, and we both knew it was a lie. After dinner, he packed for another trip. "Chicago 2 days," he said, like it was a weather forecast. When he shut the bedroom door, the sound felt final. I grabbed my jacket and left before I could talk myself out of it. Outside, the air was damp, the kind that seeps into your sleeves. I walked without a plan until I found myself in front of Ryan's house. His lights were on. For a moment, I thought about turning back. Then he opened the door. He didn't look surprised. Rough night? Something like that. He stepped aside, no questions. Inside, a single lamp was on, the same couch, the faint smell of coffee and rain. He poured me a glass of water, not wine. Somehow that made it worse. We sat across from each other, words circling in small patterns. Work, errands, the kind of things people say when they're avoiding the real ones. Then, slowly, the silence between sentences grew longer. I keep trying to do the right thing, I said finally, but I can't tell what that is anymore. He didn't interrupt, just leaned forward, elbows on knees. Maybe there isn't a right thing, he said, just what you can live with. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't trying to fix me. He was just there, steady, unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. His hand lifted halfway, then stopped near my face, not touching, just close enough to feel the warmth radiating between us. You don't have to say anything, he said quietly. And I didn't, because if I did, I knew the dam would break. He moved his hand back, and that restraint, the not touching, hurt more than if he'd pulled me in. The air in the room felt charged, fragile. I wanted to stay, and I hated myself for it. We talked until the clock pushed past 2, about things that didn't need answers. Fear, loneliness, what honesty costs when you've gone too far. He told me he used to believe people could start over whenever they wanted. Now I think, he said, we just move the starting line and pretend we're new. When I finally stood to leave, dawn was leaking into the windows. He walked me to the door, opened it, and didn't say goodbye. I didn't either. The sky was pale blue, the kind that only shows up when the city hasn't fully woken. I walked home with the sound of my footsteps filling the empty street. I hadn't cheated, not in the way people define it, but I'd crossed something invisible and irreversible. When I unlocked my door, Ethan was asleep on the couch, suitcase half open, tie still around his neck. I watched him breathe for a second and felt both guilt and relief crash into each other. It was a night of almosts, almost touching, almost honesty, almost walking away sooner. And somehow that made it worse than anything that could have actually happened. For a few days I tried to reset things, walked the dog earlier, avoided the cafe, answered Ethan's calls with practiced cheer. He was in New York this time, sending photos of conference rooms and skyline views like postcards from another version of our marriage. I told him the dog missed him, though the truth was she'd stopped checking the door. By the third night, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a cardboard box in Ryan's hands. "You left some things?" he said. "I didn't," I replied automatically. He smiled faintly. Then they found their way to me on their own. Inside were small pieces of familiarity. A paperback I'd lent him weeks ago, a scarf I didn't remember forgetting, a napkin from the cafe with my handwriting on it, just a grocery list. At the bottom lay a folded piece of paper. I looked up, waiting for an explanation, but he was already backing away. "Just wanted to return what's yours," he said. "No agenda." When I opened the note later, it read in simple ink, "You leave little things behind, but somehow you take parts of me with you." I stared at the words for a long time. They weren't dramatic, just honest, too honest. That evening, I walked to the old theater downtown, the one that smelled of butter and dust. A small sign outside read, "Classic Film Night, Double Feature." The title didn't matter. I saw him in line before he saw me. "Didn't expect you," he said when I reached him. "Maybe I didn't either," I admitted. We sat near the back. The screen flickered to life, but neither of us looked at it. Halfway through, his hand found mine. It wasn't planned, and there was no reason to pretend surprise. It just fit there, like it had been waiting too long. I didn't pull away. The room was dark, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about what came next. The weight of his thumb brushed against mine every few seconds, steady, grounding. When the credits rolled, he didn't speak right away. Then softly, "I don't know what this is or where it goes, but I don't regret any of it." I looked at him, tried to find words, but everything that came to mind sounded too small, so I said nothing. He nodded, as if silence itself were an answer. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly. He walked me halfway home, keeping a respectful distance, like we both understood how fragile the boundary had become. At my corner, we stopped. "Ethan's back Monday?" he asked. "Yeah," he nodded again. "Then I'll give you space." "Maybe that's best," I said. He hesitated, eyes on the pavement. "Just don't think you imagined any of this." I wanted to say I couldn't if I tried, but the words stayed behind my teeth. When I got home, I placed the box on the table and turned off the light. The scarf, the book, the note, they were just objects, harmless on their own. But the moment I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of his hand against mine, the quiet certainty of someone who meant what he said, even if he shouldn't have. I lay there, watching the ceiling blur, knowing that the hardest part wasn't what had happened between us. It was how easily I could still feel that it wasn't over. A week later, he was gone. No message, no knock. Just an empty parking space where his car had always been. The jasmine by the fence had started to fade, petals scattered across the grass, like quiet evidence that time was still moving, even when I wasn't. The landlord said he'd left early, no forwarding address. I nodded like it was expected, like I'd always known he wouldn't stay. Maybe I had. Some people enter your life like visitors. They never plan to unpack. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, listening to the hum of the city below. Every sound found a memory. The coffee machine at the cafe, his laugh by the bins, the static before the kiss. It wasn't nostalgia, exactly. More like muscle memory that refused to fade. 2 days later, I checked the mail and found a small padded envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a single sticky note. "Play me once, then delete it." I stared at it for hours before plugging it in. The file was only 20 seconds long. The screen lit up with a shaky video, my backyard, nighttime. The camera pointed toward the jasmine bush the same night he'd kissed me. The light from the fire pit flickered against the leaves. I watched myself laugh at something, then lean in. The kiss was brief, tender, nothing scandalous. But the way he looked at me when I stepped back, it was all there. His voice came through faintly, over the sound of crickets. "Every sound has a pause between notes," he said. "We're that pause." And then the video cut to black. I didn't cry. I didn't even replay it. I just sat there, still, the kind of stillness that doesn't need drama to hurt. After a while, I ejected the drive and set it on the counter. I didn't delete it, not yet. When Ethan came home that weekend, He asked if I wanted to take a trip. "Somewhere quiet," he said. I told him yes and meant it, even if I wasn't sure what version of myself was agreeing. That evening, as I packed, I caught a faint trace of jasmine from the window. It was barely there, but enough to make me stop for a second. I closed the suitcase, fed the dog, and turned off the kitchen light. In another life, maybe Ryan stayed. Maybe I did something different. But here, now, all that was left was the small weight of what had happened, and the certainty that it had mattered. Before bed, I picked up the flash drive one last time. I thought about deleting it, then slid it into the drawer instead. Some endings don't need to be erased. They just need to stay quiet. The next morning, the city sounded ordinary again. Cars, footsteps, the neighbor's door slamming. But when I poured my coffee, the sound of it hitting the cup made me pause. Soft, steady, familiar. It was just coffee, just a morning. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.